The scorching Bangkok sun beat down on the busy streets when Clint Eastwood, the legendary Hollywood actor and director, decided to explore the less touristy alleys of the Thai capital. At 93 years old, his imposing figure still attracted curious glances from locals, who whispered far on as they saw him pass by. With slow but determined steps, Clint entered a neighborhood known for its authenticity and the absence of the artificial shine of tourism. The aroma of spices and the buzz of street markets filled the air, creating an urban symphony that captured the essence of the Asia he so admired. As he walked, Clint reflected on his long career. The good, the bad, and the ugly felt like a distant echo of an era that no longer existed. However, the spirit of the man with no name still pulsed through his veins, even if now his battles were more against time than against outlaws from the Old West. At every corner, a new story unfolded before his experienced eyes. Street vendors shouted offers in Thai, children ran barefoot through the narrow alleys, and the smell of tom yum and pad Thai mingled with the damp, heavy afternoon air. If you're enjoying this journey through Asia with Clint Eastwood, be sure to follow us until the end. Your opinion is valuable to us, and we hope this story captivates you as much as it captivated us writing it. Suddenly, something caught the veteran actor's attention. A stealthy movement in a side alley, barely noticeable to the less trained eye. Clint slowed his pace, his intuition sharpened by years of playing vigilante characters now on high alert. Two men, with a local appearance, surrounded a young woman. Their movements were predatory, their gazes threatening. The girl, who looked no older than 16, was visibly frightened, her eyes pleading with any passerby for help. Clint felt the weight of years on his shoulders. "I'm too old for this," he thought, remembering his character's famous line in Unforgiven. But something inside him stirred, a spark of the old hero he had played so many times on screen. Time seemed to slow down as Clint assessed the situation. His years of experience in Hollywood had taught him how to read scenes quickly, and this wasn't one he could ignore, even though he was so far from home. "Make my day," he muttered to himself, a distant echo of Dirty Harry echoing in his mind. Clint knew he couldn't just pull out a gun and resolve the situation like in the movies. Reality demanded a different, more cautious approach. As he approached the alley, Clint felt a mixture of adrenaline and apprehension. He was no longer the young cowboy capable of taking down villains with a single punch. Now every step was calculated, every movement considered. The sounds of the street seemed to diminish, as if the world was holding its breath. Clint could hear his own heart pounding, a reminder that despite his age, he was still alive and capable of making a difference. As he got closer, the details of the scene became clearer. The girl was visibly shaking, her hands pressed against her chest in a gesture of self-defense. The men, oblivious to Clint's approach, continued their threatening advance. Clint knew he needed to act fast. Every second counted. He took a deep breath, preparing to intervene. There was no script for the scene, no director to yell cut if something went wrong. It was real life, raw and unpredictable. With determination in his eyes, Clint took the final step towards the alley. The old lone wolf was about to spring into action once again, proving that some heroes never truly retire, no matter how many springs they've seen pass by. The narrow alley seemed to swallow the daylight, creating elongated shadows that danced on the peeling walls. Clint Eastwood, with the firm stance that characterized him, entered this dark setting, his eyes quickly adjusting to the gloom. The two men, now clearly visible, exuded an aura of danger. Their mischievous smiles and predatory gazes made their intentions clear. The young woman, cornered against the wall, was shaking like a leaf in the wind. Clint felt a knot in his stomach. The scene before him was like a film noir come to life, but without the security of a movie set. Here, the danger was real, palpable, and he was the only one who could change the course of this story. "Hey, you guys!" Clint called out, his hoarse voice echoing off the alley walls. The familiar timbre, which made villains shudder in dozens of films, now had a similar effect in real life. The attackers turned, surprised by the interruption. Their eyes widened as they recognized the iconic figure before them. For a moment, they looked like characters frozen in a scene, unsure of how to react. Clint stepped forward, his presence filling the narrow alley. "Have you ever thought about choosing someone your size?" he teased, channeling the bravado of his most famous characters. The girl took advantage of the distraction to take a few steps away, her eyes fixed on Clint, a mix of fear and hope reflected in them. It was as if she couldn't believe her savior was a Hollywood legend. One of the men, recovering from the initial shock, advanced menacingly towards Clint. "That's none of your business, old man. Go back the way you came," he growled in broken English. Clint didn't back down. His years in Hollywood taught him to maintain his composure in the face of threats, real or staged. "When I see injustice, it becomes my business," he retorted, his voice filled with determination. The second attacker, noticing the tension escalating, pulled something from his pocket. The dim light reflected off the blade of a knife, adding a new level of danger to the situation. "Don't do anything stupid, kid," Clint warned, his eyes fixed on the gun. He knew he was at a physical disadvantage, but years of playing heroes gave him an air of confidence that was hard to ignore. The young girl, seeing an opportunity, began to slowly move towards the exit of the alley. His steps were hesitant, as if he feared that any sudden movement would trigger chaos. Clint, noticing the girl's movement, decided to keep the attacker's attention on himself. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice full of authority. "I've faced guys way worse than you, and that was just in the movies." The men exchanged uncertain glances. Clint Eastwood's fame transcended borders, and even there, in that alley in Bangkok, his name carried weight. Doubt began to settle in their minds. The air in the alley grew thick with tension. Clint, the young woman, and the two attackers formed an unlikely quartet, each calculating their next move. The outcome of this real scene was about to be written, and Clint knew there would be no second take. The silence in the alley was so thick you could hear the distant hum of Bangkok traffic. Clint Eastwood, veteran of countless cinematic confrontations, now faced a real dilemma. His body, aged by years, betrayed the urgency of his spirit. "You have two options," Clint said, his deep voice cutting through the tense air. "You can either leave here now and forget this ever happened, or we can see how this story ends. And believe me, I have experience with dramatic endings." The man with the knife stepped forward, the blade glowing menacingly. "You're bluffing, old man. You can't do anything to us," he challenged, a mischievous smile forming on his lips. Clint felt a familiar rush of adrenaline course through his body. It was the same feeling he experienced before an action scene, but this time, there were no stunt doubles or special effects to save him. The young woman, taking advantage of the distraction, managed to take a few more steps towards the exit of the alley. His eyes alternated between Clint and the freedom that the busy street promised. "Have you ever heard of the man with no name?" Clint asked, buying time and keeping the attacker's attention. "Well, he may not have a name, but he has a lot of tricks up his sleeve." The two men hesitated, the mention of Clint's famous character causing pause in their hostile intentions. Doubt began to settle in their eyes, questioning whether they should continue with their nefarious plans. Clint took advantage of the moment of uncertainty. With a quick movement that surprised even himself, he kicked a nearby trash can, causing a bang that echoed through the alley. The sudden noise startled the attackers, causing them to instinctively take a step back. The young woman, seeing the opportunity, ran towards the exit of the alley. "Run, girl!" Clint shouted, his voice thick with urgency. He knew his best chance was to make sure she escaped, even if it put him in greater danger. The men, realizing their prey was escaping, turned their attention to Clint with renewed fury. "You're going to regret this, old man," threatened the one holding the knife. Clint positioned himself, blocking the path between the attackers and the exit of the alley. "I've regretted a lot of things in my life, but doing the right thing was never one of them," he replied, his voice firm despite the imminent danger. The first attacker moved forward, aiming a punch at Clint. The actor, using decades of experience in fight scenes, barely managed to dodge, feeling the wind of the blow pass over his face. "I still have a few tricks," Clint muttered, more to himself than his opponents. He knew he couldn't win a physical fight, but maybe he could buy enough time for help to arrive. The sound of sirens in the distance brought a new element to the scene. The attackers' eyes widened at the familiar sound, the reality of their situation finally setting in. Clint, in turn, felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The confrontation was reaching its climax, and he knew that the next few moments would be crucial. The sirens were approaching quickly, their wail cutting through the thick Bangkok air. Clint Eastwood, still in a defensive position, saw a change in the attacker's eyes. Fear began to replace arrogance. "Looks like the cavalry is coming," Clint said, a wry smile forming on his wrinkled lips. "Maybe it's time for you to reconsider your life choices." The man with the knife looked nervously at his companion, doubt evident on his face. "Let's get out of here," he shouted, his previous bravado quickly dissipating. Clint, sensing the change in atmosphere, decided to press his advantage. "Do the right thing, boys. Throw the knife on the ground and wait for the police to arrive. Believe me, I've seen how this story ends in the movies, and it's not pretty on your end." The second attacker, who until then had remained more silent, finally spoke. "What if we just leave? Without any more fuss?" His voice trembled, revealing the fear that now dominated him. "That's probably the smartest decision you've made today," Clint replied, keeping his stance firm. "But remember, the consequences of your actions will always catch up with you, sooner or later." The two men exchanged quick glances, a silent conversation passing between them. With a sudden movement, the armed man threw the knife to the ground, the metal clanking against the dirty concrete of the alley. "Come on," he shouted to his companion, and they both began running towards the opposite end of the alley, quickly disappearing into the gloom. Clint let out a deep sigh, feeling the weight of tension leave his shoulders. He leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees, the adrenaline beginning to ebb from his system. "I still have what it takes," he muttered to himself, a mix of pride and exhaustion in his voice. The echo of the sirens was getting closer, promising an outcome to this surreal scene. Just then, Clint heard hurried footsteps approaching. Raising his head, he saw the young woman who had escaped earlier, accompanied by two Thai police officers. "There! It's him!" exclaimed the girl in Thai, pointing at Clint. His eyes shone with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. The police approached cautiously, still uncertain about the situation. One of them, recognizing Clint, widened his eyes in surprise. "Are you Clint Eastwood?" he asked in halting English. Clint nodded, a tired smile forming on his face. "In the flesh, although a little older than in the movies," he replied, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. As the police began asking questions and the young woman tried to explain what had happened, Clint found himself reflecting on the events of the last few minutes. He had faced villains in hundreds of films throughout his career, but nothing had prepared him for the raw reality of this confrontation in a Bangkok alley. The sun was beginning to set over Bangkok, casting a golden glow over the bustling streets. Clint Eastwood, sitting in a wicker chair in front of a local cafe, watched the city go by with tired but satisfied eyes. The young woman he had helped, now identified as Malai, sat opposite him, her eyes still shining with admiration. "How can I thank you enough?" she asked in halting English. Clint smiled, the lines on his face deepening. "Living well and helping others when you can. That's the best thanks," he replied, his voice full of wisdom accumulated over the years. A police officer approached the table, holding a notepad. "Mr. Eastwood, we need some more details for the report." The suspects were captured a few blocks away. Clint nodded, recounting the events with the precision of a director describing a scene. His words painted a vivid picture of the confrontation in the alley, making Malai and the policeman lean forward, captured by the narrative. "You know," Clint said, after finishing his account, "I've spent decades playing heroes on screen. But today I understood the true meaning of courage." The officer, visibly impressed, paused before asking, "Mr. Eastwood, weren't you afraid?" They were younger, armed. Clint let out a low laugh. "Fear? Of course I was. But as I always say in my films, the secret is not to be afraid, but to not let fear paralyze you." Malai, who was listening intently, asked, "Why did you decide to help?" Many people would have simply ignored it or called the police. Clint was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the activity on the street. "You know, girl, throughout my life, I've learned that sometimes we have to be the hero we want to see in the world. We can't always wait for others to do what's right." The sun was now almost completely below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets. Clint stood up slowly, stretching his back. "Well, I think it's time to head back to the hotel. It's been an interesting day." Malai stood up quickly. "May I accompany you?" "To ensure you arrive safely," he offered, a shy smile on his face. Clint laughed. "I think I've proven that I can still take care of myself, but I appreciate the company," he replied, motioning for her to follow him. As they walked through the bright streets of Bangkok, Clint reflected on the day's events. "You know, Malai," he said, his voice soft, "today reminded me why I started making films in the first place. To tell stories that inspire, that show the best of humanity even in the worst situations." When they arrived at the hotel, Clint turned to Malai one last time. "Remember, girl, life is the most important movie you'll ever make. Make sure it's one you're proud of." With one last wave, he entered the hotel, leaving behind not only an inspired young woman, but also a legend who proved that some heroes never stop fighting for what is right, no matter their age.